more on how inflation is impacting consumers and in what ways. We're joined by Josh Enomoto. He's a contributor to financial research platforms InvestorPlace and Benzinga. Josh, thanks very much. I appreciate you taking time for us. It is interesting that we have seen in the past on social media some empty grocery store shelves pop up. But what about the prices? What are U.S. families going to do? We heard one alternative, obviously, is a food bank, but what kind of belt tightening is going on?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of belt tightening. Let me just put this into context. So on paper, the consumer price index is up around 7% year over year. But I wanted to know what that actually meant on the ground floor. So I recently had a chance to sit down with the owner of Vapor Authority, which is a local business here in San Diego that sells alternative wellness products. And he told me that shipping costs have accelerated by 3 or 4 times since pre-pandemic norms. As well, in addition to those shipping costs increases, the time to deliver products to the customer as well as to receive products from the manufacturer have increased on average 2 or 3 times. Now, currently, his business as well as the rest of the industry is absorbing these costs. Due to competitive concerns. But if you multiply that story thousands of times across the nation, we could really be seeing a situation where the inflation problem could be a lot worse unless the Federal Reserve acts strongly right now.
Okay, let's talk about, despite COVID, the U.S. economy had been clicking along okay. And when was the last time the U.S. saw inflation at this level, and what was the outcome back then?
Sure. Well, back in the 1960s and 1970s, the Federal Reserve implemented an economic theory called the Phillips curve, which posited that inflation has an inverse correlation with the unemployment rate. So as long as the Fed modulated the benchmark interest rates, that they could somehow control the unemployment rate. Well, that theory was disproven when during the early 1980s, both inflation and unemployment rate skyrocketed. And so that ushered in a change of leadership at the Federal Reserve when Paul Volcker took over. Now, Volcker was committed to attacking inflation by attacking the money supply. And initially, his policies were not popular. He received a lot of criticism from Congress, but he stayed true to the course. And that's really the lesson that the Federal Reserve can apply today.
Interesting.
Whatever decision they make, whatever strategies they conjure up, to attack this inflation problem, they've got to stick with it and commit to it, irrespective of political pressure.
You know, and Josh, one thing we hear so much about the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and really, once again, it is disproportionately hitting the poor.
Yeah, absolutely. The problem with this inflation situation that we have right now is we have basically 2 classes of people. The one class, they can save money because they can save money as a luxury, whereas the other class, they have to save money, or if they don't, they're not going to be able to put food on the table. And these extreme disparities is extremely problematic. The issue, though, is the pernicious nature of inflation, because when you have an inflationary environment, whoever spends the money first is the winner, and whoever saves money is the loser. Well, that's exactly the opposite ethos that you need to apply in this situation. People really need to save money in order to divert that to long-term investments and to leverage the power of money. But when your money is losing value by 6 or 7% every year, the purchasing power, that's a crisis that the Federal Reserve has to take very seriously.
Josh, real quickly, a couple of things. The Fed is possibly looking at the largest rate hike in 2 decades, and a lot of countries internationally are concerned about that it could affect the global economy. How do you weigh the differences between U.S. and the global issues?
That is an incredibly difficult situation, because really I think there were toxicities that were papered over from the Great Recession that we haven't fundamentally addressed. So now we're in a situation where we have unfortunately, the Fed has no good options. It has to pick the least worst option, and that is really going to be a massive debate going forward.
Okay, Josh Enomoto, the contributor for InvestorPlace and Benzinga, thanks very much. We appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Sean.